So, I've been meaning to make this video for a long time already, but I couldn't get my head around the subject and about what I wanted to say about it. But today I'm going to try to do this, and I have to be honest that I'm only going to scratch the surface about this subject because it's a big one. Now the big question is, how do you know that a mix is good from a quality point of view? So does a mix that you have made or somebody else has made for you have quality, or is it junk? Like, how do you know that? And since I've started to become, a bit bigger on YouTube, I get, multiple emails a week from you guys, the viewers, with like a mix in there asking me like, is this a good mix or whatever. And sometimes this is just because of insecurity reasons, because people just don't know if it's a good mix anymore. It can of course happen if you listen too long to your own mixes. But sometimes I also get the question like, I paid for this mix and it doesn't sound good. What do I need to do now? I sometimes also get their own mix with it, and then I listen to it and I have to type them an email back, which is not cool to hear, but in which I most of the time think like, okay, but the mix you paid for is definitely better from a quality point of view, but maybe it's not towards your taste. And that is something that I want to talk about today, because you cannot really judge the quality of a mix objectively, but there are a lot of things to think about when you're, checking a mix. So I'm going to try to, give you guys some insight about that today. So let's go. Now I can tell you what a good mix is not about. And that is, things like fully mixed analog, in a big studio, an engineer with a lot of big names as references. That all doesn't mean that the mix is going to be great. Now that first one, analog, I shouldn't really say that, but then again, it is also not a reason to deliver a bad mix. Like it's just the preferred way of working for an engineer, and for me a preferred sound character and also preferred workflow. So, but it certainly doesn't guarantee a good sounding mix. Absolutely not. Of course, if there are like real mistakes, like from an absolute point of view, mistakes in a mix, certain things as like when the engineer needed to edit a vocal and he's like editing in the middle of a breathing part, or there are certain ticks still in the vocal, then of course you have a reason to discuss the quality of the work of the engineer. But that's also for me where it ends. I mean, even things like distortion aren't a quality issue anymore, because, I think 30 years ago, engineers did their best to deliver a clean as possible mix. 30 years ago, it was also very difficult to deliver a clean mix because almost everything in your signal path was coloring. Nowadays, those things are used a lot for creative purposes as well. So if you have some distortion or some saturation over a mix, it is always the question like, is this intended or not? And what is the idea behind it? And I would say that distortion already isn't, a way to judge a mix. And of course, this is super genre dependent, of course, because, doing some distortion in like very classical music, I won't get away with that. But if I'm like mixing an EDM track or certain rock tracks, I can easily get away with distortion on parts where you shouldn't use distortion. For instance, I did a whole rock album where I layered like a super distorted vocal under the clean vocal, and it was very obvious there. So very cool. So when we look at mixing very basically, very from like the foundation of mixing, is about two things. The first one is balancing, and the second one is effects. So those two things are the things that I want to, talk about and give some insight in. Because the first thing, like balancing, is what it is all about. I mean, mixing means balancing. I mean, if you're cooking, then you're also like balancing out the ingredients in the mix that is going to be the food. Anyway, for an engineer, it's all about translating it. If we go back to the basics, like when we were still recording only orchestral music and normal music still had to be invented. I know it was around, but the conductor, the guy in front, had the final word in, deciding the balances. And in the beginning, we were only recording with 2 microphones, or 1 even, because stereo recording still had to be invented. And the engineer didn't really have something to balance and something to mix. But nowadays, if we record an orchestra with a lot of microphones, it's still the conductor that is deciding the balances in the orchestra. And it's up to the engineer to translate this. Now, what I already said, that it is genre specific, is also true, because what works on one genre absolutely doesn't work on another genre, unless specifically asked. I mean, I work for some experimental clients. I work for some metal clients that really want an EDM feel in it, which I'm, of course, that's what I was good at, or I still am good at, but I don't do it a lot anymore. And lately also some other, like, not pop tracks, but that wanted to have a more, understandable, clean bass sound in it. Now, of course, it's not only about, moving faders up and down until it sounds in balance. I mean, I can mix a track with only the faders and it will sound in balance, but it won't sound right because the bass guitar is fighting with the bass drum for space. So, of course, it's also about using your dynamics. So dynamics for me are EQ, compression, limiting, gating, that kind of stuff. But EQ for me is part of the dynamics. So you have dynamics and effects. Very, I have to make that clear. So it's certainly also about using the dynamics. Sometimes you can get away with a vocal that is, or get away. It sounds really as if you're not doing your best. But sometimes you can lower a vocal in volume in the mix by using more compression, of course, because then it sounds louder. But it will glue better in the mix than with like less compression and, a bit louder. And even if the vocal is very stable in volume, it's still, sometimes you really have to search for, like, how am I going to balance this? Because, I get, on a daily basis, I get feedback on the mixes that I do for my clients. And sometimes the client says, I would like to hear more. I had one client with a Wurlitzer, and the client is watching, I think, so that would be funny. But it was constantly like, okay, a bit more, a bit less, bit more. And for me, it's then like searching for, okay, it's not about bringing up the volume, but it's about looking into the EQing range. How can I give this instrument more definition so that it punches through the mix more, and not just simply balancing. So balancing is about way more than that. Now, what can happen is that I can create a mix that is completely balanced in the exact same way as the mix of my client, and that sometimes is my guideline, sometimes it's not. It's also, something that I communicate about in the beginning, because I want to know if, I can make my own decisions on balances or that I need to follow a certain pattern. But then I make my own mix, and then all of a sudden there's so much space because everything fits together so well that it starts to get a different mix, like a different balance. And you cannot get the original balance back anymore because of the amount of space there is. Now, the question is it then a lesser quality mix because I'm not following the balances of the producer anymore? Or do we need to get used to the fact that it now sounds more open and better balanced? Now, when we talk about balancing, I have like a small example over here of 2 tracks, and if we listen to the vocal balance, I hope this comes across on YouTube, you'll hear that on both mixes the balance of like how loud the vocal is really fits the music well, but it's very different to each other.
I said the last drink was the last drink. You make it hard to leave. We're telling secrets in the dark while drinking whiskey neat.
And this is the other one.
I can see it in your eyes that you're shaking 'cause you're holding it back. Maybe you'll make up your mind now I'm here by your side.
Now, one would prefer the first mix, the other one would prefer the second mix. But if I would, be a judge in a competition, which it's not a competition, let's be honest. But if, I need to judge a lot of mixes because you guys keep sending it to me. They are both good, although they are super different. So there you go again. It's about taste, and it's also about understanding the taste of somebody else, or understanding where the mix is going. And in the end, it's also about what is the end consumer going to hear, like the listener, the people that we do it for, which probably will just listen to our mixes on their iPhones. But again, in what kind of, I always say, like, what kind of sonic journey do you give them? It's a big word. Now, the other thing that mixing is about effects. And it's really interesting where that difference lays, because, you know, mixing is like, of course, the balancing and coloring of what is already there. And the effects is really adding something to it. And a good example, very good example that I have is with the track that I just, you know, showed to you guys. Because this is almost how it is mixed in the original royalty-free track. But to my own taste, I would add some reverb to that vocal. So
I will get close to your heartache.
Now enable it.
If you want to open your door, I'm feeling kinda lost when your mind is hiding whatever that is choking your chest.
For me, enabling that reverb gives me a feeling that suits this music genre way better than, you know, without that reverb. For me, that is not making it dreamy enough. You know what I mean? I mean, let's use our heart and our feel for this. But in other mixes, a vocal, you know, completely dry would really make impact. There you go again. So difficult to judge these things, and it's very subjective. So this is not only about reverb, by the way, it's also about like using delay. You can get very creative with delay. I advise everybody to do fader automation with a delay to really make the vocal a bit cleaner. And, you know, you can play a lot with it and really express yourself with a delay. Oh, I sound so hopeless when I say this, because what is this about? It's just mixing music. It's not like fixing the climate change problem. Anyway, it's also about choruses and, you know, other effects that you can use to add something to the mix. Now, with knowing what mixing is about and knowing that it's a very subjective way of knowing if your mix is good and knowing if somebody else's mix is good, there are some tricks that we can use in order to figure out if the thing that we are doing is correct and is going to work. First thing that I want to give everybody as a tip is use a second set of speakers. So apart from using your normal, you know, big speakers that have a big frequency response, also use these ones. These ones, they are as big as my head. They look bigger than they are, by the way, because on the camera, this thing looks really big, but it's a mix cube from Aventone. I use the mix cubes. You also have the NS10 from Yamaha. But if you listen to your mix on one of these, even better if you listen to it in mono, by the way. But in stereo, it makes a lot of sense to listen in stereo as well. Listen to it on those type of speakers in low volume, and then judge if the mix is still translating in the same way as it was on your big speakers. For me, it really helps a lot using these things. I actually mix a lot of time on these small ones, and my big ones, I think I use 30% of the time I use the big speakers, and the rest of the time I'm listening on these small ones. So that's one of the ways. I have to say that you need to get used to that method. So of course you have to practice it, but they are very honest, those speakers. Another one of the ways to figure out if your mix is good is asking somebody else. Now, of course, I get, you know, sent a lot of mixes, and I'm always very honest, not only on my YouTube channel, but also on my email. If somebody says, I think this mix is bad, and I listen to it and I think it's actually good, then I would say it. And also the other way around. If somebody says, this is a very good mix, what do you think? And I think it's shit, I would also say it. Ask somebody to listen on their own speakers. So don't ask somebody to come into your studio and listen on your studio speakers, because you want people to listen to your work on their own listening devices, because they are used to how that sounds. That's also why the car test is working so well, because you're most of us subconsciously sitting in your car driving, listening to music in there, and you get used to how that music sounds. So you're an end consumer, an end listener, and whatever in there. So when you're driving your car and listen to your own mixes, or somebody else listens to your mixes in their car, they can really judge if it sounds right. Because it's all about, is it right? Do you hit the sweet spot with it? there's no wrong, I think. So it's really my advice to ask people around you to check your work and have them done it on their speakers. Also, don't go out there and listen to your mix on different speakers that you've never heard before. That doesn't make any sense. It's a bit like measuring with inches while you're used to measuring things with millimeters or centimeters or meters or whatever. To conclude this going nowhere video, if you listen to a mix, and it doesn't matter if it's your mix or somebody else's mix or whatever, I don't care. And with your own mix, it always helps to like put it away for a few days and then listen to it. The question is, does this make any sense? Does how this is mixed make any sense at all? Sometimes it can be a bit strange, but does it make any sense? And is it a certain type of taste, a certain type of spices used in that mix that suits the target audience? Because that's of course, you know, what we're all doing it for, the audience, the people, the end consumer, the listener, the whatever. And you can see this in a different way. Like if you would serve fries in a sushi restaurant, you'll get a lot of strange faces. Apart from me, because I don't like sushi and I like fries. So I would be happy, but the rest of the restaurant won't. And it's about the rest of the restaurant. It's not about me. It's not about what I like. It's about what the audience will like. So I know that this video doesn't answer a lot of questions that people have about, you know, mixes and judging the quality of a mix. But I hope that it works in giving more insight in how to do this, because it's a very difficult subject. I mean, if you need to judge the quality of a fridge and the fridge breaks after 2 years, then the fridge is shit. It's a very absolute things, like fridge breaks, so fridge is shit. You know, you can program that in like a small script. But for a mix, when you have to deal with music, emotion, feel, taste, how can you judge that? I don't know. And I think that what the best mixing engineers in the world have in common all is not necessarily their technical knowledge and their technical capabilities, but they all have a very good taste. And with that being said, I want to end this video. So thanks a lot for watching this video. Next week I'm going to try to make the same kind of video, but then about mastering. Now mastering is a bit more technical, so we can talk about a few absolute things in mastering, but also like where are the thresholds for taste instead of, you know, technical stuff. So I hope I can, you know, make that video before next week. I'm a bit busy, but I'll try to make it for next week. Now, of course, I want to promote my own Patreon campaign, which I will link over here. By pledging a bit to my Patreon campaign, you can help my channel out, because making these videos costs way more time and way more money than you would think. So Patreon is over here. You get some things in return, so check it out over here. I make a lot more audio engineering videos, so if you want to see one of them, then I will link one of them over here. Don't forget to subscribe, keep pushing, and bye-bye.